That night, while I was having dinner at my son's house, the phone suddenly rang. On the other end of the line, my neighbor's trembling voice lowered into a whisper. "Are you home?" "No," I replied. A heavy silence followed before he spoke again. "Then who's going through your house right now?" A chill shot through my entire body. I jumped to my feet, ready to rush out the door, but my son suddenly blocked my way, laughing a little too loudly, as if to cover something up. And in that moment, I realized, he was hiding a secret you won't believe. Before we go any further, make sure to subscribe and tell me what time it is where you're watching this video. The wind howled along the porch, carrying a sharp chill. The kitchen light flickered as if gasping. The steady tick of the clock stretched each moment into an eternity. I sat at the table, hearing even the drip of the coffee, then the door flew open like a gunshot. Caleb barged in without bothering to knock. His worn coat scraped the doorframe, and the smell of sweat and alcohol trailed with his heavy steps. His bloodshot eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. The weak light carved deep lines into his face as if with a knife. 36,000, the words came out not as a plea but as an order. "Dad, give me the money. 36,000. Tonight. If not, the two of us will go down with them." His voice was cold and dry. I set the half-full cup down beside the messy pile of mail. The ceramic clicked against the table with a sharp sound that seemed to herald a storm. My hands, calloused by the years, trembled slightly, but I held them steady, forcing a composed look, even though it felt as if my heart were being squeezed. Late afternoon light slanted through the window, stretching his shadow across his troubled face. Shadows lengthened and tightened around the kitchen. His shirt was rumpled and untucked. Dark circles under his eyes had appeared where they hadn't been months ago. 36,000. The number pulsed in my head like a warning drum. "What have you gotten mixed up in now?" I asked, my voice dry, arms folded across my chest, disappointment heavy like a stone in my stomach. Caleb began to pace, his boots clacking on the wooden floor, unable to sit still, unable to look me in the eye. His fist slammed the table and the salt shaker jumped. A beer can on the shelf rolled and clattered. "It's serious, Dad. A business deal gone wrong. We need to fix it now." He spoke fast, irritable, trying to mask the panic. "A business deal," I said, keeping my tone even but firm. "Or gambling debt?" The words exposed an old wound. His face flushed, then hardened into a defensive posture, broad shoulders blocking the kitchen doorway like a fortress. "That's none of your business, Dad. You have money, we know, from selling the farm." His voice was hoarse, strained. "The farm, the sweat and blood of 3 generations, had been sold last year to give me money for my retirement. That money was supposed to be enough for the rest of my life, not to be funneled into the safe of some casino because my 44-year-old son couldn't control himself." I stepped closer, watching every movement, the veins in his hands standing out, his lips pressed tight, his teeth clenched. The smell of alcohol, sweat, and something like fear mixed together. "How much do you owe them?" I asked. "Them?" His voice faltered, as if trying to shove a secret back down. I don't know what you mean." "The people who scare you like that. The ones who had you here at 7 p.m. on Thursday looking like you haven't slept in a week." I spoke slowly, each word measured. He ran a hand through his greasy hair, revealing stiff, upright locks. "Dad, please, you don't understand," he begged. But the plea was no longer innocent. I remembered the previous times. 10,000 last year for a sure thing at the racetrack, 8,000 the year before for poker. Each time Caleb had claimed he'd learned his lesson only to repeat the same pattern. Promises had grown hollow. "From now on, I'm not giving you another cent." My voice was hard. "If you get swept away, so be it. I will accept it." "What do you mean? I'm your son," he shouted, the sound echoing through the cold kitchen. "Exactly why I say no." I turned away, leaning over the sink without thinking, my back cutting across the flickering light behind him. "Every dollar I give you disappears into slot machines or on card tables. I will not enable you anymore." "Enable?" The word burst from his mouth like a curse. "I'm asking you for help. You call that enabling?" I came back around and gripped the edge of the table as if I needed an anchor. "I call it by its name. You're 38 years old, Caleb. When will you stop running to Dad every time you blow things up? His expression changed, his chest heaved. After a beat of silence, something cold and inhuman passed over my son's face, something I had never seen in all my years as a father. "You'll regret this, you old man," he whispered, a threat carefully measured. "You think you lived to be this age to rest in peace? You'll soon know what it means to lose everything." He jerked his arm as if to do something. A nearby chair screeched. A beer can on the shelf was knocked and rolled, struck a table leg, skittered across the wood. Before I could answer, he turned and stomped down the hallway. The door slammed behind him like a punch. The sound reverberated through the kitchen, leaving a silence as if the house had just endured an earthquake. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, my heart hammering, the clock ticking like a verdict. A son I had once known had just spoken a threat, and the night stretched long, very long, with shadows yet to be lit. The screen door slammed shut behind Caleb Mercer, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence. Through the kitchen window, I watched him climb into his battered old pickup. The engine roared harshly, rattling the window panes. The red taillights glowed against the fading dusk as the truck reversed down the gravel road, then vanished into a blur of gray dust. The house fell quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but one that seemed to hold its breath. The cicadas droned in the backyard, blending with the steady tick of the clock, each tick like a hammer striking my temple. I stood frozen in the doorway, a chill creeping up my spine as Caleb's words echoed in my mind. "You'll regret this, old man." I spent the entire weekend avoiding that kitchen, the place where those words were spoken. I worked in the garden, fixed the fence, mowed the lawn, doing anything to forget that cold, empty look in his eyes. Yet every time I passed the doorway, the memory returned, the bloodshot stare, the hissed words through clenched teeth, and the haunting sense that whatever had begun that night was far from over. By Monday morning, the sky was draped in a thin veil of smoke-gray clouds. I sat in my worn armchair, a cup of coffee beside me long gone cold. The stillness was so deep that I could hear the faint creak of wood beneath the floorboards with each beat of my heart. Then the rotary phone on the wooden shelf rang out. The metallic sound sliced through the air, sharp and cold, making me drop my spoon. The ringing drilled into the silence, carrying with it an unnamed omen. I picked up the receiver, my voice rough from surprise. "Hello? Hi, Dad." Caleb's voice sounded different, warm, gentle, almost cheerful. The anger and tension from Thursday night had vanished, replaced with a smoothness that felt rehearsed. "Dad, I said some things I shouldn't have the other night. I've been thinking a lot, and you were right, about everything. This time will be different. I promise." I froze, my hand gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles turned white. "That's strange," I said slowly. "In 44 years you've never once apologized. What's different this time?" Caleb laughed a short, awkward laugh, the kind that sounded like someone reading from a script. "I know, Dad, but I've changed. Really. I just need you to believe me this once. Lydia thinks so too. She says we should start over like a real family again." My eyes drifted to the old photographs on the mantel, one of a 5-year-old boy, grinning wide, holding a jar full of fireflies. That image now felt like a faded gravestone of innocence long gone. "We've had this talk before, son," I sighed softly. "But this time it's different. I mean it." His tone grew bright, almost convincing. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Lydia and I want to invite you to dinner this Wednesday evening. She's making your favorite beef stew with potatoes." I fell silent, feeling my pulse quicken. "Wednesday night?" "Yeah, 7:30 sharp." Caleb jumped in quickly, almost afraid I might refuse. "We're at 142 Cedar Lane, the blue house with white shutters, right across from the elementary school. Remember I mentioned it before?" No, he hadn't mentioned it before, but I didn't correct him. Instead, I wrote the address down on a napkin, noticing how smoothly he recited it, each word precise, as if he were reading it off a page rather than describing his own home. "Lydia's really excited to see you," he continued, his tone suddenly too soft, too careful. "She keeps saying we need to be a real family again. It was true, Lydia Mercer had always loved togetherness. Christmas, birthdays, Thanksgiving, she was the one who kept the family threads intact, even when Caleb let them fray. But today, there was something different in his voice. Not sincerity, calculation. I murmured, staring at the napkin in my hand. I suppose I'll stop by. That's wonderful, Dad. Really great. 7:30, okay? His voice lifted a half note higher, almost too eager. Thank you for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I really appreciate it. Then the line went dead. The long, hollow dial tone lingered in my ear, cold as steel. I sat motionless, watching the napkin tremble slightly in the breeze from the window. The numbers 142 Cedar Lane stood out sharply, like an invitation or a warning. The whole conversation had flowed too smoothly, every word perfectly placed like a scene practiced in advance. But maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe he truly wanted to make amends. Maybe Lydia had finally reached him. I set the phone down and stared at the napkin once more. Such a fragile piece of paper, yet its weight pressed on my chest like a stone. And in one fleeting moment, a thought crossed my mind that I couldn't shake. Had I just agreed to dinner, or signed my own sentence? The evening news crackled like static in the background as I mindlessly chewed my dinner, Caleb's dinner invitation hanging in my mind like an anchor. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted toward the napkin lying on the coffee table, the one on which I'd scrawled the address, 142 Cedar Lane. Even after turning off the TV, I found myself pacing the house, checking every lock more carefully than usual. The wind hissed through the cracks, the hallway light flickered, and the floorboards creaked as though the house itself was holding its breath. Those numbers haunted me. 10 o'clock. I lay on the bed, still in my clothes, shoes off but mind restless. The ceiling fan spun above me, casting restless shadows across the walls. The digital clock glowed green beside me. 11:32, 12:18, 12:50. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Caleb's face from that Thursday night, not the smooth, apologetic voice from today's call, but the frozen, unfamiliar glare of a man who had once threatened me in my own kitchen. The son I had raised would never look at me that way. But then again, the son I once knew would never have needed $36,000 from loan sharks either. I remembered the night he called at 3 in the morning from a casino, slurring through the smell of whiskey. "Dad, my car broke down. Can you come get me?" When I arrived, he was staggering across the parking lot, pockets empty, dignity gone. On the drive home, he fell asleep in the passenger seat, snoring softly like the little boy who used to doze off on long drives to visit his grandmother. That boy once spent entire summers in the garage with me, passing wrenches, asking endless questions about engines and carburetors. The teenager who beamed when he opened his first paycheck from the hardware store. The young man who promised he'd make something of himself, who swore he'd rise above this small, dusty town. When had that boy disappeared? When had gambling outweighed family, self-respect, and everything we'd built together? I got up and stepped to the window. The road where Caleb's truck had roared off 3 nights ago now lay silent, the only light coming from a single street lamp at the corner. Somewhere out there, he was planning something. I could feel it in my bones, the same intuition that once told me when storms were coming across the old fields. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe tonight's call was sincere. Maybe Lydia had finally pulled him back, made him fight to rebuild. She was practical, steady, everything Caleb wasn't. If anyone could bring him back, it was her. I returned to the bed and picked up the picture frame from the nightstand. Caleb at 13, gap-toothed, grinning beside the go-kart we'd built together. His hands were greasy, his eyes bright with the pride of doing something on his own. That boy had once believed that hard work could fix anything. Maybe a piece of him still existed somewhere. Maybe Wednesday's dinner would be the first step toward finding it. 12:26, my eyelids grew heavy. I clutched the frame to my chest and drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, the edge of my awareness rippling with nameless unease. Whatever tomorrow brought, it would come. Sometimes, a father has nothing left but faith, and must test it. Monday morning. I stood by the sink, coffee cup in hand, gazing out the window toward the street. The house felt like it had spent the night holding its breath. Sleep still eluded me after that call. My thoughts spun between hope and suspicion like a record caught on a scratch. Caleb's voice had sounded sincere, but 44 years of watching him had taught me the difference between true remorse and performance. Then I noticed a truck. It was parked where no one ever parked, directly across from Mrs. Whitmore's mailbox, facing my driveway. Dew still clung to the windshield, meaning it had been there all night. I'd glimpsed it the day before while taking the trash out, assuming it belonged to a neighbor's guest. Inside, behind the wheel, a man sat hunched forward. His fingers tapped fast and tense against the dashboard, and every so often he snapped his head up to scan the street, counting, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the calm of New Auburn's quiet street felt too tight, like the entire neighborhood was being observed. I set the cup down and stepped outside. Gravel crunched under my shoes. The morning breeze stirred the wind chime and made the old wooden door creak. The porch light flickered again. As I approached, I saw him clearly, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, hollow cheeks, and dark rings under his eyes. His collar was stained, his whole face the color of sleepless nights. I tapped lightly on the glass. He flinched hard, fumbling to roll down the window. His eyes were bloodshot, his gaze shrinking back like a cornered animal. "Good morning," I said, forcing a polite tone. "Everything all right? I've noticed you've been parked here since yesterday." "Oh, yes, sir. Fine, all fine." His voice was high, stuttering, avoiding my eyes. "Car's acting up. I'm waiting for it to cool down so I can start it again." I glanced at the license plate, Montana. Odd. This was a quiet neighborhood in Colorado. Engine trouble, huh? I've got a bit of experience, 40 years, fixing everything from tractors to pickups. I can take a look if you'd like. No, sir, that's kind of you. Must be electrical, or maybe the carburetor," he stammered, contradicting himself. "My friend's coming soon to check it out. Everything will be sorted out soon." The last words were vague, almost as if they weren't about the car at all. I tilted my head. Strange. Most folks would call for a tow, not sit in their truck all night. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turned white. In the back, I spotted a crowbar, a power drill, and several toolboxes, far too much for a simple electrical problem. "If you change your mind, I live right across the street. Name's Harold Mercer." I nodded toward my house, noticing how his eyes followed the motion, cold and calculating. "There's a good auto shop about 3 miles down Highway 27. If your friend doesn't make it—" "You're very kind, Mr. Mercer." He cut me off quickly, already reaching for the window crank. "I'm sure everything will be fine." I stepped back. "Just be careful. Folks around here don't like trouble in broad daylight." As I turned to leave, I glanced back once more. The man had rolled up the window again. His fingers resumed tapping on the dashboard. Every few seconds, his gaze flicked toward my house, not aimlessly, but with precision, as if measuring distances, windows, blind spots. Back in the kitchen, my coffee had gone cold. The feeling of being lied to by a stranger gnawed at my gut. The license plate number etched itself into my memory. VXN 3842. I didn't know why, only that I should remember it. By noon, when I went to get the mail, the truck was gone, but on the pavement across from Mrs. Whitmore's mailbox, tire tracks remained pressed deep into the dirt, a quiet confirmation that it hadn't been a dream. And with that, I knew something had begun. Thursday arrived under a gentle spring sun, yet a strange chill crept through the porch and crawled up my neck. The sky was bright, but thin gray clouds slithered quietly across it, muting what should have been warmth. All day, my mood swung between anticipation and unease. The memory of that strange truck from yesterday had faded like a smear of ink, not gone, just absorbed into the paper. By 6:30, I began to get ready. My navy blue suit, worn at the elbows, was pressed smooth. My leather shoes shone enough to mirror the bedroom light. I chose a conservative tie and checked my wallet, an old habit, a kind of readiness for whatever the night might bring. From the small wine cellar, I took out a bottle of Cabernet reserved for special occasions. In the mirror, the reflection was of an old man trying his best to look proper for his son, a sight that both warmed and tightened my chest. How long had it been since we'd shared a meal without tension? At 7, I stepped outside and nearly bumped into Arthur Collins, who was watering the flower bed by our property line. He looked up with his sun-browned smile. "Well, don't you look sharp tonight, Harold? What's the occasion?" "Caleb invited me to dinner," I said, lifting the wine bottle, trying to sound casual. "It's been a while." Arthur's gaze softened, warm and genuine. "That's good news. Family's the one thing worth keeping, especially at our age." "We'll see," I replied, appreciating his optimism, though I couldn't share it fully. "This could get complicated." "Maybe, but sometimes it just takes one person to reach out first." He shut off the hose and leaned against the fence post. "Sounds like Caleb might be trying to do that." The road to Caleb's new neighborhood led me through familiar Stonebridge, across the small bridge that gave the town its name. I'd driven that route hundreds of times, yet tonight every turn felt like I was driving toward my own trial, no longer a dinner, but a verdict. Then it appeared, 142 Cedar Lane, a blue house with white shutters, neatly trimmed lawn, spotless curb, light spilled from the windows, bright, golden, but not warm. It had the harsh, deliberate glow of a stage. I parked behind a silver sedan, likely Lydia's, adjusted my tie in the rearview mirror. The wine bottle felt heavier as I walked up the path. Through the large front window, I saw shadows moving back and forth, too measured, too practiced, like a scene being arranged. The porch light flicked on just as my foot hit the first step. I took a deep breath and pressed the doorbell. Quick footsteps approached from inside. The door swung open before the chime had finished echoing. Caleb's smile was wide enough to strain his face, glued in place. "Right on time, Dad. That's great. You're always on time. Always." His voice climbed half a pitch, like he was forcing steadiness through his nerves. Come in, come in. Lydia's been cooking since early afternoon." Lydia nearly burst from behind the door, as though she'd been waiting for her cue. She took the bottle from me, her hands trembling slightly, a sheen of sweat glinting at her temple under the hallway light. "Mr. Mercer, it's so lovely to see you. This wine, oh, it's beautiful. You really didn't have to, but so thoughtful of you." She held the bottle against her chest like a shield. Crossing the threshold, the first thing that hit me was the smell not of food, but of cleaning agents. Sharp, chemical, sterile. The scent of a place that had just been wiped down. Underneath it was the aroma of steak, mashed potatoes, and something else metallic, faint, unsettling. Every surface gleamed unnaturally. On the coffee table, a crystal vase held a dozen perfect roses, the kind that came with a price tag still dangling in spirit. Extravagant, considering Caleb's supposed financial troubles. "Let me take your coat, Dad," Caleb said, already moving behind me, uncharacteristically brisk. "You look great. That tie really brings out your eyes." On the counter, I noticed the corkscrew brand new, a sliver of the price tag still clinging to the handle. The dining room looked like a magazine photo. Elegant china, cutlery aligned with surgical precision, napkins folded into exact triangles, wine glasses positioned like compass points, beautiful but cold. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a presentation. "Caleb said you haven't been by since we moved in," Lydia said as she guided me to the table, avoiding my eyes. "We've done a lot of fixing up. Caleb's quite handy. He did most of it himself." Her voice faltered, as if afraid to miss a line she'd rehearsed. I glanced around, smiling faintly, and added a thin needle of suspicion. "The house looks wonderful, almost too wonderful for what I thought Caleb could afford right now." Caleb's laugh came out tight. "You know me, Dad. Careful with every penny. But tonight's special." The main course arrived, medium steak, creamy mashed potatoes, crisp green beans. The scent of stew filled the room, but beneath it lingered that sterile tang of bleach. Caleb handled the corkscrew, still sticky from the label, pretending confidence. The cork popped with a sharp snap, like a starting gun. Lydia's eyes flicked toward him, waiting for something unspoken, before she looked back down at the tablecloth. When I sat, I noticed my chair felt odd, heavy, resistant. The legs scraped against the wood with a dull, deliberate sound, as if it had been dragged into an exact position. I shifted slightly. The noise softened. Caleb hesitated, then smiled too quickly. Wine poured to the brim. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice still pitched unnaturally high. "To family." I raised my glass, eyes taking inventory of every detail lining up in my mind. The harsh lighting, spotless floor, the chemical smell, the brand new corkscrew, the expensive flowers, the precisely placed chair. Everything was perfect, too perfect. The kind of perfection that only exists in staging. I took a small sip, letting the wine pass my throat without taste. In that bright, artificial glow, Caleb's smile looked painted on dry, cracking at the edges. Lydia's hand trembled each time she reached for the ladle. Outside, the night was still, but inside, a cold wind had arrived long before I had, and I knew then this wasn't just a dinner. It was a script, and I very likely was not the audience. I was the prop. "Cheers!" Caleb shouted, raising his glass with a little too much flourish. Wine sloshed to the rim, spilling over his fingers, but he kept smiling. To second chances, to family, to leaving the past behind. The candlelight flickered, casting distorted shadows on the wall. The clinking of forks and knives against porcelain rang sharp and hollow, like metal scraping in an empty factory. I took a sip of wine. Its bitterness spread across my tongue, but my chest felt heavier still. My eyes never left my son's face. Every few seconds, Caleb glanced at the clock quickly, subtly, as if trying not to be caught. But I saw the small twitch in his jaw each time, and every time it happened, his smile grew tighter, more brittle, like dried paint about to crack. "Tell me, Caleb," I said, cutting a piece of steak cooked exactly how I liked it. "How's work been? Any better lately?" "Much better, Dad, really." He launched into a smooth stream of words about consulting, new investment opportunities, market expansion, as if reciting lines from a memorized report. "I'm not who I used to be. Lydia knows. I'm a new man now." Lydia nodded quickly, too quickly, her smile thin and trembling. "He's been working so hard, truly, he's changed a lot." Her voice was soft, her hands restless, pouring more water, serving more food, straightening a napkin that was already perfectly placed. Every movement felt like a distraction from looking me in the eye. The whole dinner felt like theater. Every word, every lifted glass, perfectly rehearsed. Whenever I asked about something specific, his job, his finances, the answers veered off into safer territory. "Remember when I tried to change the oil on the old Buick?" Caleb chuckled awkwardly. I spilled more than I poured in. These memories sounded chosen, rehearsed. With each passing minute, it felt less like I was dining with my family and more like sitting in the audience, watching two actors read from a script. Then the phone rang. Not an ordinary ring, it sliced through the air like an alarm siren, shattering the fragile illusion of the room. Caleb froze, fork suspended midair. Lydia went still, her hand clutching the wine bottle, veins standing out against her skin. The candlelight trembled, and the shadows on the wall quivered. "Excuse me, let me see who it is," I said quietly, gripping the phone. The screen lit up with a familiar name. Arthur Collins, my neighbor, and one of the few people I trusted. "Go ahead, Dad, answer it really, don't worry about us," Caleb said too quickly, his voice a pitch higher, his breathing uneven. "Arthur, what's wrong?" I asked, stepping back a few paces, trying to keep my tone even. Both Caleb and Lydia were staring at me, unblinking. "Harold, sorry to bother you." Arthur's deep, raspy voice came through the receiver. "Are you home? I thought I saw your car in the driveway, but now I'm not so sure." "I'm at Caleb's for dinner." "Why? What's going on?" A brief silence. Then Arthur's voice dropped, urgent and low. "There's a flashlight inside your house. Not just flickering lights, someone's in there. I saw movement by your upstairs window, first in the living room, then the kitchen, now upstairs. Whoever it is, they're methodical. I've been watching for 10 minutes. Should I call the police?" Caleb's fork slipped from his hand, clattering against the plate with a harsh metallic crash. Lydia clutched the wine bottle tighter, her fingers trembling so badly that the glass neck quivered against the table. "You said, inside my house?" My voice sounded distant, even to me. "You're sure?" "Positive. I'm looking at it right now from my window. I'll stay here until you get back." "Good. Call the police for me. I'm on my way." I hung up. The air in the room thickened instantly. Caleb's mouth opened, but no words came out. Lydia stood frozen, her wide eyes glistening in the flicker of candlelight, her breath uneven. "Someone's in my house," I said quickly, slipping on my coat. "I have to go." Caleb's laugh burst out loud and harsh, ringing in the small room like metal colliding. "Come on, Dad. You know Arthur, he's always imagining things. You know him, always thinks he's still on night watch duty. Nobody's stupid enough to break into your place." His words stumbled halfway, faltering on the edge just enough to expose something dark beneath them. "Enough, Caleb." I met his eyes, my tone sharp as a blade. "I've heard that fake voice of yours too many times. Arthur doesn't imagine things. Someone's in my house, and you know that better than anyone." Please don't rush," Lydia stammered, her voice breaking into pieces. Maybe there's some kind of explanation. Please, Mr. Mercer, wait." But I was already at the door. The keys in my hand felt cold and heavy like a weapon. A chair crashed behind me. Caleb lunged forward, sudden and desperate, his movement clumsy and raw. He blocked the doorway, arms spread, sweat glistening on his forehead, eyes wide with panic. The air between us thickened with the sharp scent of alcohol and fear. Outside, the wind howled through the porch, carrying the chimes' hollow jingling. Inside, the candle flames whipped violently, throwing warped, broken shadows across the walls, as if the play we'd been acting in had just been torn apart midway through the second act. Caleb raised his hands as if to calm me, but his entire body was rigid, his shadow swelling against the wall like a black giant blocking the exit. The candlelight flickered, and the room seemed to shrink. I could hear my heartbeat, heavy and uneven, blending with the smell of sweat and alcohol thick enough to choke on. "Wait, Dad, you're overreacting." He gave a dry laugh, the sound ricocheting off the walls like metal striking tin. "Arthur's an old man. He probably mistook a shadow for a person. You trust him more than your own son?" "Of course," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "Arthur's never been wrong with me. Caleb, step aside, right now, or I'll consider you no longer my son." He turned, blocking the door, his hands gripping my shoulders not to comfort, but to hold me back. His pupils had dilated, his eyes wild, like a cornered predator. "Think, Dad, if there were burglars, when would they come? When the house is empty, right? They'd have to scout first, wouldn't they?" I froze. The words were too precise, too informed. "How do you know they've been scouting?" He paused a beat too long, then stammered, his voice hoarse. I don't. That's just how criminals operate, right? They plan ahead." His grip tightened, as though afraid I might break free. I could feel the tremor in his fingers, not from fear of what was outside, but of what might come if I left. "Dad, please." His voice dropped low, trembling with a buried growl. "Let's finish dinner, and then we'll go together. If you go back now, you'll drag us both down. You don't understand who you're dealing with." Behind him, Lydia stood pressed against the wall, clutching a dish towel so tightly the fabric twisted in her hands. When our eyes met, she gave a small shake of her head, then looked down. In that fleeting second, I saw the guilt etched on her face, the silent confession. "Gary," she blurted instinctively, then stopped herself, correcting quickly. "Caleb, please, don't do this. Mr. Mercer deserves to know the truth." "Step aside, Caleb." I moved closer, close enough to see the sweat glistening on his temple despite the cool air. Sanity means trusting the neighbor who's never lied to me over a son who's lied too many times to count. His face flushed crimson. For a moment, I thought he might swing at me, but instead, he stepped forward, his broad frame filling the doorway like a wall of flesh. "You're not going anywhere until you understand. This time, Things are beyond your control. Caleb Mercer, I barked each word, the voice of a father that had once stopped his tantrums dead in their tracks. Step away from that door, now. So what then? His breath came fast, thick with the stench of wine and fear. You'll call the police? Have them arrest your own son? You destroy this family over the delusions of a paranoid old man? His eyes flicked again toward the door, then the clock, then to Lydia. The sequence was deliberate. His lips moved faintly, silently. He was counting. It's not a delusion when Arthur saw flashlights moving through my house, I said, my voice low but steady. And when you stopped me on that exact night, I have every right to ask why. The air thickened, heavy with the mingled scent of bleach and impending rain. Caleb's face twisted through a storm of emotions, shock, guilt, rage, until finally, resignation. The hollow surrender of a man who knows his lie has collapsed. He snapped the lock. Click! The metallic sound rang out, sharp and final like the cocking of a gun, like the click of fate tightening its hold. The keys vanished into his pocket. You're not leaving this house. I stared at the stranger wearing my son's face. A chill sliced through my chest, not fear, but the blade of betrayal. Open the door, Caleb. No. He leaned back against it, arms crossed. The mask of concern fell away, revealing only hardened resolve. Not until you calmed down and listened to reason. Reason? I kept my voice even, though the blood thudded in my temples. You've just locked your father in against his will, while someone's tearing through his house. What reason justifies that? You don't understand, he said, his tone sinking into a cold, threatening murmur. There are people involved in this you don't want to cross. They don't forgive debts. They don't accept excuses. Mr. Mercer. Lydia's voice trembled, tears streaking her face. I didn't want any of this. But Caleb. She bit her lip, choking back the rest, her hand trembling as if she wanted to let the towel fall but couldn't. And in that moment, I understood. Every piece fell into place. The 36,000, the threat, you'll regret this, the constant glances at the clock, the locked door. I looked into my son's eyes and saw what I had feared most. That the promise wasn't just a threat. It was a sentence. I need to use the restroom, I said quietly, forcing my voice to stay even though my heart was pounding against my ribs. The yellow light in the hallway flickered, painting Caleb's face a sickly shade of gold. He looked at me, suspicion flashing across his eyes like a blade. But something, perhaps the last trace of decency, or the remnants of the upbringing he once had, kept him from refusing outright. Go, he said, his tone low and cold. But remember this, you're not getting away. I nodded, trying to appear calm, and walked toward the back of the house. My shadow stretched long along the wall, swallowed by the trembling light, as though it too knew what was coming. The bathroom was small and airless. When the door shut behind me, the hinges groaned, a sound that felt like a final warning. I stood still, listening. Outside, their voices seeped through the thin door, muffled, tense, and laced with fear. Gary, she blurted instinctively, then corrected herself. Caleb, don't drag this out any longer. He's going to figure it out. I know what I'm doing. His voice came back, dry, clipped, every word heavy. Just a few more minutes. I clenched my fists. There was no longer any doubt. The bathroom window was lower than I remembered. The paint was cracked and peeling, but the latch still worked. I lifted it slowly. The wood creaked, slicing through the silence like a knife. The mesh screen popped free and fell softly onto a pile of old towels. A rush of cold, damp air flooded in, carrying the earthy smell of soil and the distant barking of dog sounds that felt as if they came from another world, one both far away and closing in. I placed my hands on the sill, feeling every joint in my fingers ache. At 68, my body protested every movement, but desperation can turn fear into strength. I braced myself, twisted, and squeezed through the narrow frame. My back scraped against the wood, my clothes whispered as they tore. Then came the fall. The impact was hard. Pain shot from my knees down my shins. I gasped, but I was alive. Mud clung to my jacket, Crushed flowers snapped beneath my shoes, and the cold air burned my lungs. I gritted my teeth and stood. When I looked up, I caught a glimpse of Lydia in the upstairs window. Her face was pale, eyes wide and panicked as if begging for forgiveness while terrified of being seen. I turned away. This was no time for emotion. Keeping low, I moved along the fence line, one step at a time through the damp grass. Every crunch of a dry leaf sounded like a gunshot in the night. Behind me, Caleb's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and furious. "Dad, where are you?" My heart jumped. I moved faster, breath heaving, a trail of cold sweat down my spine. A loud thud echoed from inside the sound of him discovering the open window. My car was still parked at the curb, half hidden beneath the shadow of a tree. My hands shook as I pulled out the keys, nearly dropping them. Metal clinked softly as I slid one into the ignition. I held my breath. Silence. Then turn. The engine hummed to life. The sound was faint, but in the silence of that night, it felt like thunder. I eased the car into reverse, the tires crunching against the gravel. In the rearview mirror, the house lights suddenly went dark. They knew. I pressed the gas. The car surged forward, cutting through the night. My pulse hammered so violently it felt as if someone were counting each beat, measuring the distance between survival and death. It wasn't until I'd cleared 2 blocks that I finally exhaled. The night wind streamed through the crack in the window, cold, sharp, but I felt a burn inside me that had nothing to do with fear. It was rage. My own son had betrayed me, not just with lies or deceit, but with premeditation. He had planned a crime against his own father. The dinner, the apology, Lydia's forced gentleness, all of it had been a performance, meant to keep me seated while my home was ransacked. I drove through streets that once held the peace of a lifetime's worth of memories. Now they were nothing but a backdrop to betrayal. Beneath the layers of anger, pain, and disbelief, another feeling began to rise, something fierce, steady, and cold. Resolve. I knew where Caleb got it from: his stubbornness, his calm under pressure, that ruthless stare. He had inherited those from me. His mistake was believing that age had dulled my edge. For 40 years, I had faced men far more dangerous than him, and now my son would learn that some lessons come too late. And the price for this one would be his own future. When I turned onto my street, red and blue lights flashed across the white walls. 2 patrol cars were parked in front of my house. The door hung open, the curtains whipped in the wind. The front steps were littered with debris, a shattered frame, the scattered contents of my drawers, and Margaret's wooden keepsake box lying on its side, the lid thrown open. The sight cut into me like a blade. But amid the chaos, I saw Arthur Collins standing across the street under the glow of the lamppost, phone in hand. When he met my eyes, he nodded. He had kept his word. I turned off the engine and stepped out. Police flashlights swept through what was once my home, illuminating not safety but violation. The walls that had once held warmth now echoed betrayal. Inside me, all emotion condensed into a single cold vow. Caleb buried our bond under his greed, but whoever turned my son into this will have to answer to me. The sirens wailed long and sharp, tearing through the row of houses like a visual storm. Blue and red lights swept across the windows, spilling over the walls in pulsing flashes. When I turned the corner, my heart sank. The front yard of my home was lined with patrol cars, their lights strobing wildly. Neighbors whispered and pointed. The Thompson kids were hurried indoors by their parents, the doors slamming shut behind them, leaving the street holding its breath. I parked behind the last cruiser and hurried toward the porch. Deputy Mark Turner was in command, radio crackling at his shoulder. Through the windshield of one of the police cars, I saw a thin, pale man handcuffed, head bowed low. His shoulders trembled every time someone mentioned the word mastermind. "Mr. Mercer," Turner approached, his tone professional and steady, as if reading a verdict. "Glad you made it. We've apprehended the intruder, and Mr. Arthur Collins provided a crucial tip." "Arthur was right," I murmured, relief laced with a cold sting. Across the street, Arthur stood by his fence, arms folded, his quiet nod hammering the truth into place. "There really was someone in my house?" "Yes, sir." Turner's nod was crisp. "We caught the suspect in your basement, attempting to break into your ironclad safe. And the suspect confessed not only to the break-in, but also identified your son as the orchestrator." The words landed like a blow. I had suspected it since the moment Caleb tried to stop me from leaving that dinner, but hearing it aloud from a police officer made the truth heavy, solid, immovable. Turner guided me closer to the car. I peered through the glass. The man looked to be in his 50s, his skin ghostly pale, hair falling across his forehead. Victor Hales, the man from the strange truck parked near Mrs. Whitmore's mailbox. His breathing was ragged. When he heard Caleb's name, his eyes flinched as if to cry not out of remorse, but out of fear of being abandoned. "His name's Victor Hales. You recognize him?" "I spoke to him yesterday. He said his truck broke down." The words felt twisted in my throat. I had nearly offered help to the man who came to rob me. "Hales is cooperating in hopes of a lighter sentence," Turner explained evenly. "He claims Caleb Mercer promised him $6,000 in exchange for $36,000 from your safe. Tonight's dinner was the setup to keep you away." "Did he open the safe?" I asked, my gaze fixed on Hales's hollow face. "No, sir. The basement door was locked. Just as he breached it, my team moved in thanks to Arthur's call. He ran upstairs, but we subdued him. The safe was tampered with, but remains intact." We went down to the basement. Turner's flashlight swept across the heavy ironclad safe. The old paint was scratched, the metal scorched where a drill had overheated. A crowbar, screwdriver, and power drill lay scattered, the tools of desperation, not skill. "Please inspect everything carefully after we seal the scene," Turner said, noting details in his pad. Outside, Arthur crossed the street and gripped my hand tightly, his calloused palm grounding me. "Harold, I told you that truck looked off. Yesterday morning, I saw it again, the driver talking to someone at the corner. Thought it was some delivery. Never imagined this." "You saved my life savings, Arthur," I said, voice thick. "I didn't want to picture what would have happened if those $36,000 my retirement had vanished." Turner returned, his expression grave. "We're heading to 142 Cedar Lane now. Between Hales's confession and the evidence here, we have sufficient cause to arrest Caleb Mercer for conspiracy to commit burglary and related charges. I need your confirmation. Do you wish to press full charges?" I looked at my violated home, the torn-up yard, the shattered picture frame, Margaret's wooden keepsake box lying open on the steps. Then I turned to Arthur, the neighbor who had stood guard over my dignity tonight. "Yes," I said, firm as iron. "I want to press full charges against Caleb Mercer and anyone involved. It is not of the fander as long for mens. We after 80 instead were lomen to deciled with the milas. We had of the panta dazers with a long dies, with a lot of the Sioux, wire and daughter siled words." The convoy of police cars moved down the quiet streets of Stonebridge like a glowing serpent, cutting through the dark. This was no longer a path toward reconciliation, but a procession of justice chasing deceit. I followed at the rear, the blue and red lights flashing across shuttered windows. At 142 Cedar Lane, every window blazed bright as if light could ward off the darkness tightening around it. Through the wide front window, I saw Caleb pacing like a caged animal while Lydia darted about, closing suitcases. Turner arranged the perimeter with quick, efficient commands. I stopped across the street, close enough to see, far enough not to interfere. The door opened before Turner could knock. Lydia stood there, eyes swollen, face drained of color, clutching a suitcase like a lifeline. Behind her, Caleb appeared, shirt wrinkled, hair disheveled, sweat glistening down his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, wild with panic. "Mrs. Mercer," Turner announced clearly, "we have a warrant for your husband's arrest. Is Caleb Mercer inside?" "He's here," she whispered, stepping aside. "I can't protect him anymore." Caleb stepped forward, fury and despair twisting his face as Turner read his rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." "This is insane!" Caleb shouted, thrashing as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, a sound as cold as a verdict. Dad, don't let them do this. Say something. You can't hand your own blood over to the police. I stood tall, eyes fixed on him. You handed yourself over the moment you did this, Caleb. Turner didn't flinch. Caleb Mercer, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit burglary. The neighbors no longer whispered. Their eyes held pity and quiet condemnation. Lydia stepped back, hugging the suitcase to her chest. Arthur stood beside me, silent, the living embodiment of conscience. As the patrol car carrying Caleb started its engine, I spoke clearly for Turner, for Caleb, and for myself. Take him to Stonebridge Central Precinct. And put in the record I'm pressing full charges. The convoy rolled forward. The blue and red lights stretched across the road like the blade of a knife. I watched until they disappeared around the bend, then turned back toward the silence that remained where one chapter had ended, and justice had finally begun its work. The handcuffs clinked under the flashing patrol lights, washing Caleb Mercer's face in alternating red and blue, a pale, cornered mask with nowhere left to hide. Charged with incitement to commit a crime and conspiracy to theft, Deputy Mark Turner read aloud, his tone flat and cold as a judge's gavel. Your accomplice has already provided a detailed statement describing your role as both financier and coordinator of the break-in. Accomplice? What accomplice? I don't know what you're talking about, Caleb shouted, but his eyes flickered toward the row of police cars clinging to a desperate hope that Victor Hales hadn't betrayed him. Lydia Mercer stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of horror and resignation. When Caleb threw her a pleading look, she stepped back a small movement, but enough to sever both body and soul from the man she had once called her husband. Lydia, tell them this is insane. I was with you all night. You know I didn't do anything wrong, Caleb cried, his voice breaking. I know. Lydia's voice was soft, but it carried clearly through the heavy stillness that gripped the entire Stonebridge block. I know you locked your father inside our house. I know you hired someone to break in while you kept him away. And I know you planned it all because he refused to pay off your gambling debts. The air froze, turning the quiet street into an open courtroom. Neighbors stood silent, some whispering, like father, like son, others shaking their heads in pity for Harold Mercer. Caleb's face contorted, his eyelids twitched, lips trembling as if swallowing shards of glass. You don't understand, Caleb shouted, struggling against the cuffs, the chain clattering in protest. If I go down, this whole family goes down with me. This family has been sinking for a long time, Caleb, Lydia replied, her voice sharp as steel. And I'm done drowning with you. The car door opened. Caleb was pushed down into the back seat. He slammed his head against the glass, screaming until his voice broke. A trapped animal's howl cut short when the door slammed shut, leaving only the faint crackle of the police radio. Deputy Turner stepped beside me as the convoy prepared to move out. You'll need to come in tomorrow to complete your statement, Mr. Mercer. The case is solid, Victor Hales confessed, and Mrs. Lydia Mercer corroborated everything. Hales also hinted at a larger network behind the debts we'll investigate further. I nodded, watching the patrol car disappear down the street. 38 years of fatherhood, and it ended with my son in handcuffs for plotting to rob his own father. The patrol lights faded, and the neighborhood shifted from chaos to a hollow silence, like the vacuum left behind after a storm. R for Ulishan, with Wild to the Sarv US. 2 days later, on Saturday afternoon, the reporters were gone and the crime scene tape had been removed. Arthur Collins and I sat on the porch, cold beers sweating in our hands, watching Stonebridge return to its quiet rhythm. The sunset was beautiful but not peaceful. It closed a chapter of life still streaked with unhealed shadows. The court called this morning, I said, taking a sip. Caleb got 6 years probation, full restitution, and 600 hours of community service. The judge said committing a crime against a family member is an aggravating factor, not a mitigating one. Arthur nodded. Sounds fair. What about Hales? 3 years in county prison. Repeat offender, no leniency. I looked across the street at the empty spot where the strange truck had once parked, the beginning of it all. Funny, isn't it? I exhaled. Part of me almost feels sorry for Caleb. Almost. Almost still means something, Arthur said gently, leaning back. It means you're still his father, after everything. We sat in a silence only two men who had weathered a storm could share. In a matter of days, Arthur had become more than a neighbor. He had become the gatekeeper of conscience when I had lost my own footing. I still remember that Tuesday morning, Arthur said slowly. That truck gave me chills like watching someone stalk your house in broad daylight. Your instincts were clockwork sharp. If you hadn't noticed, hadn't called. I shook my head. That would have been 50 years of labor, my entire retirement gone. But it's still here, Arthur said with a faint smile. That's what matters. At least now you know your home is safe. That old ironclad safe of your father's, it earned its name. Yesterday, I had installed motion sensors and reinforced the locks, not out of paranoia, but because of one simple truth. Once trust breaks, rebuilding it requires vigilance. I heard from Lydia, I continued. She filed for divorce, said she can't live with a man willing to destroy his own family for a roll of the dice. She's wise, Arthur nodded, dragged into a tragedy she never chose. The court's sending Caleb to mandatory gambling rehabilitation. Whether it changes him or not, I don't know. I can't fix him, and I won't shield him anymore. The late sunlight spread warmth across the porch steps. For the first time in days, I felt calm. The storm had passed. Justice had done its work. Life would go on never the same, because the fracture of trust leaves scars but forward, nonetheless. You know what's strangest? I asked. That Thursday dinner. Watching Caleb and Lydia perform like actors, knowing it was wrong, but unable to stop it. Arthur nodded quietly. That's a father's instinct. You raised him. You know when it's real and when it's not. The problem is, you wanted to believe he'd changed. Exactly, I said softly. I wanted to believe so badly that I ignored what was right in front of me. I set the empty can down on the table. I won't make that mistake again. It doesn't mean I'll stop hoping, just that from now on, I'll hope with my eyes open. The afternoon drifted slowly toward dusk. The sunset laid a soft golden veil over Stonebridge, thin as silk yet heavy with memory. Familiar sounds returned, the hum of a lawnmower, a dog barking in a nearby yard, the laughter of the Thompson kids circling the brick-paved street on their bikes. Life, it seemed, had returned to normal. But inside me, nothing felt normal. The echo of handcuffs snapping shut around Caleb's wrists still rang in my mind like a bell that refused to stop tolling. His shouts blended with the fading wail of police sirens, leaving behind only an echo, a scar carved into the memory of a father. I sat on the porch, watching my neighbors go about their lives. Mrs. Whitmore watered her roses, smiling and waving as she always did. Across the street, Arthur Collins walked over with 2 cold beers in hand. He placed one in front of me, then sat down beside me without a word. Sometimes, silence is the deepest kind of conversation. You didn't just protect me, Arthur, I said softly, my voice catching in my throat. You protected a lifetime of memories and the fragile faith I almost lost. Arthur tilted his head, eyes glinting under the fading light. Faith once broken is hard to mend, Harold, but if it can be rebuilt, it becomes stronger than steel, and tonight you proved you were never truly alone. I nodded, following his gaze toward the empty patch of curb outside Mrs. Whitmore's, the spot where Victor Hales's truck had once stood. That empty space, I said quietly, feels like a scar on this street now. A reminder that safety, the thing we take most for granted, can be threatened at any moment. Arthur smiled, the kind of smile worn by a man who's seen both the bright and the dark sides of life. What matters, Harold, is that you didn't let fear take hold. You're still here, in your home, surrounded by people who still believe in you. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the porch, painting the table in deep amber. It was beautiful and bittersweet, as if the world itself was trying to cast a warm glow over the unseen cracks inside me. I took a sip of beer, the cool bitterness sliding down my throat. Caleb wanted to take more than money from me, I said slowly. He wanted to steal my sense of safety, my peace in old age, and maybe worst of all, he made me believe I'd failed as a father. Arthur was silent for a moment before answering. No one teaches us how to lose a child and still keep our humanity, he said quietly. But maybe that's exactly what you've just learned. I smiled faintly, a tired smile, but one of release. I still have the money, Arthur, but I lost something else, the son I thought I could still save. Now I understand. Sometimes losing is the only way to survive. The curtain behind me swayed gently in the breeze, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. I looked around the neighborhood at the people who had become my true anchors, while my own family fell apart. It was them, not blood, who kept me grounded in reality. Family, I said, isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's the people who stand up for you when the world turns its back. Arthur raised his beer, clinking it lightly against mine. And sometimes, he said, it's the father who has the courage to let justice do its work, even when justice bears his son's name. The sun dipped fully beyond the trees. The last traces of light faded into a deep violet sky as a cool breeze swept across the porch. I sat there, listening to the gentle sounds of life, continuing the soft ring of wind chimes, the rolling wheels of children's bikes, and somewhere within, the steady rhythm of my own heart finding peace again. Tonight, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, on my porch, beside a friend who had proven his worth in the darkest hour, in a neighborhood that had shown the true strength of community when tested. Justice had been served. The neighborhood had been preserved. And trust, though fractured by betrayal, could still be reborn, so long as it was placed where it belonged, in the hands of those who truly deserve it. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes, a single act, a choice to believe in someone at the right moment, can change the course of an entire story. Thank you for watching Worthy Revenge.